They meant to break them. Humans built an army from the rubble. The sky turned black on a Tuesday morning when the Velthari arrived, and the people of Earth looked up at 10,000 ships that blocked out the sun like a metal plague spreading across the heavens. Commander Lena Voss stood in the command center beneath Sao Paulo, watching the screens fill with images of alien vessels that stretched from horizon to horizon, and she felt her blood turn cold in her veins. Nobody had ever seen anything like this before, not in all of human history. The message came through every speaker, every screen, every device on the planet at the same moment, and the voice was cold and mechanical and utterly without mercy. Species designation: human. You are now property of the Velthari Dominion. Kneel and submit or face complete erasure. You have one planetary rotation to decide. Humanity chose to fight. Lena remembered the first hours with terrible clarity, how every nation launched their weapons at once, how the missiles streaked upward like angry fireflies racing toward the dark ships above. She remembered thinking that maybe, just maybe, they could hurt these invaders badly enough to make them leave. But the Velthari did not even bother to dodge. Their shields swallowed every nuclear weapon like a pond swallowing pebbles, and then they showed humanity what real power looked like. The gravitational weapons activated without warning, and Lena watched on the screens as entire cities began to collapse. The buildings did not fall sideways like in earthquakes, but rather pulled downward into the earth itself, crushed by invisible hands of impossible weight. New York vanished in 11 minutes, pulled into a crater of its own making, and the screams of 8 million people ended in a sound like thunder rolling beneath the ground. Tokyo followed, then London, then Mumbai, then Cairo, and the death toll climbed so fast that the computers stopped counting. Humanity fought for 11 days with everything they had, and Lena commanded what remained of the South American defense grid through all of it. She ordered strikes and retreats and desperate last stands, and she watched brave soldiers die by the thousands while achieving nothing. The Velthari moved with terrible patience, crushing resistance city by city, base by base, refusing to hurry even as humanity threw its last strength against them. They had done this before, Lena realized with growing horror. They had broken entire species, and they knew exactly how long it would take. On the 11th day, the remaining governments surrendered. Lena refused to accept the order at first, screaming into her radio that they could still fight, that they could retreat to the mountains and the caves and the deep places of the earth. But her superiors were already dead, executed by Velthari soldiers who moved through the ruins with mechanical efficiency. The occupation began like a nightmare that would not end, and the Velthari proved that conquest was only the first step of their cruelty. They separated families with cold precision, sending parents to work camps on one continent, while their children were shipped to facilities on another. They called these places integration camps, and they promised that human children would be raised to serve the Dominion with gratitude and loyalty. Lena watched from hiding as soldiers dragged screaming children from their mothers, and she bit through her own lip to keep from crying out. The blood filled her mouth with copper taste, but she stayed silent because dying now would help no one. The Velthari executed every leader they could find, politicians and generals and scientists and teachers, and anyone else who might inspire resistance. They broadcast these deaths on every remaining screen, forcing survivors to watch as humanity's best and brightest were killed one by one. "This is the price of defiance," the cold voice announced after each execution, "and this is mercy compared to what awaits those who resist." They destroyed the libraries and the museums and the monuments, grinding human history into dust and rubble. They banned gatherings of more than 3 people and made speaking of the old world a crime punishable by death. The strategy was ancient and effective, perfected over 10,000 years on 200 conquered species. Destroy hope and the body will follow, crush the spirit and the flesh will serve. Lena survived the first month by hiding in the maintenance tunnels beneath the ruined command center, eating rats and drinking water that dripped through broken pipes. She thought about dying many times, thought about walking out into the open and letting the Velthari end her pain. But something kept her moving through the darkness, some stubborn flame that refused to die even when everything else had turned to ash. She crawled out of the tunnels on the 32nd day, emerging into a city that looked like the surface of a dead moon. Sao Paulo was rubble and dust and silence, and the smoke still rose from fires that had burned for weeks. Lena walked through streets she had known her whole life, streets that were now unrecognizable canyons of broken concrete and twisted metal. She saw bodies still buried in the debris, and she said silent words for each one she passed. She found the drawing in the ruins of what had been a school, a piece of paper somehow preserved beneath a fallen beam. It showed stick figures holding hands, a family, she realized, standing beneath a yellow sun with smiles on their simple faces. A child had drawn this, probably in the hours before the attack, probably while dreaming about the future that the Velthari had stolen. And now that child was either dead or trapped in some integration camp being taught to forget everything human. Lena folded the drawing carefully and placed it in her pocket, and she made a promise to that unknown child and to all the children like them. She would not let humanity end like this, would not let the Velthari win. She started walking north, toward the mountains where other survivors might be hiding, and with every step she felt the fire inside her growing stronger. The Velthari had taken everything from humanity, cities and families and hope itself. But they had forgotten something important, something that no alien conqueror could understand. Humans were not like other species. Humans did not break and stay broken. Humans took their pain and their loss and their rage, and they built something new from the wreckage of the old. The Velthari had crushed human civilization into rubble, and they thought that meant victory. They did not know that rubble was just raw material waiting for builders. Lena climbed into the mountains as the sun set red through the smoke-filled sky, and she carried with her a single thought that would not die. They had meant to break humanity, but humanity would build an army from the ashes they left behind. They meant to break them. Humans built an army from the rubble. 5 years passed under the shadow of the Velthari, and Earth became a world of silence and labor and fear. The humans who survived worked 18 hours every day in the extraction plants and the processing facilities, digging up the resources that the Dominion craved. They slept in concrete barracks and ate paste that tasted like nothing, and they were watched by drones that floated through the air like metal ghosts. Lena Voss had changed in those 5 years, her hair now streaked with gray and her face lined with scars from fights she had barely survived. But the fire in her eyes burned brighter than ever, and she had not been idle. She had built something in the darkness, something the Velthari could not see. They called it the Ember Network, a web of survivors connected by whispers and dead drops and coded messages scratched into walls. It stretched across every continent, linking resistance cells that the aliens believed did not exist. The Velthari monitored everything with their technology, watching for signs of rebellion, listening for words of defiance. Their reports claimed that humanity had achieved total compliance, and the occupation commanders believed they had succeeded. They did not understand humans at all. In the deep mines where workers dug for rare metals, the old knowledge survived. Men and women tapped messages to each other in Morse code, using the rhythm of their tools to speak words the aliens could not hear. In the integration camps where stolen children were raised to serve, the teenagers remembered what the Velthari wanted them to forget. They taught the younger ones through songs that sounded like work chants but carried forbidden history in their words. Before the dark ships came, we built towers to touch the sky, they sang while scrubbing floors, and we will build them again by and by. The guards heard only noise, but the children heard hope. Lena traveled constantly, moving from cell to cell, always one step ahead of the patrols that hunted for troublemakers. She mapped the enemy's patterns and studied their weaknesses, and she waited for the moment when humanity could strike back. That moment came closer when she met Corvith. He was Velthari, one of the tall, gray-skinned conquerors with eyes like polished black stones, but he was different from the others. He had been a scholar before the invasion, a student of conquered species, and what he had seen on Earth had broken something inside him. "I watched your children being dragged from their parents," he told Lena in a hidden basement, his voice heavy with shame, "and I saw in their eyes the same love I feel for my own offspring. We tell ourselves that lesser species cannot truly feel, but I know now that this is a lie we use to justify evil." Lena did not trust him at first. How could she trust any Velthari after everything they had done? But Corvith proved himself over months of dangerous work. He smuggled food to starving villages and medicine to sick prisoners, and he brought information that no human could have obtained. The most important secret he revealed changed everything. "The gravitational weapons," Corvith explained, spreading stolen documents across a rough wooden table. "They require a rare isotope called Virium-7. The Dominion has used most of their supply conquering your world, and their reserves grow smaller every year." Lena stared at the numbers and felt her heart begin to race with wild hope. "You mean they cannot crush us again like they did before?" "Not without years of mining from distant systems," Corvith confirmed, "and the Dominion has grown lazy. They expect conquered species to stay broken, so they have not prepared for rebellion." The Velthari were not invincible. They were occupiers running out of ammunition. Lena began planning larger operations, coordinating with cells across the planet through the Ember network. They started small, stealing supplies and sabotaging equipment in ways that looked like accidents. Factory workers learned which bolts to loosen so machines would fail at the worst possible moment. Engineers memorized Velthari schematics and passed the knowledge through the network. Miners hid useful materials in secret caches that grew larger with each passing month. The resistance was building its strength, piece by piece, like a sword being forged one hammer strike at a time. But Lena knew that weapons and plans would mean nothing without soldiers, and the Velthari had separated humanity so completely that most survivors did not even know resistance existed. She needed to show them that hope was still alive. She needed to free the children. The integration camps were the heart of the Velthari strategy, the places where humanity's future was being twisted into obedient servants. If those children could be rescued, it would prove to every human on Earth that the Dominion could be defied. Lena gathered 50 of her best people in an abandoned subway tunnel deep beneath the ruins of Buenos Aires, and she looked at their faces in the flickering lamplight. They were thin and scarred and exhausted, but their eyes held the same fire that burned in her own heart. "I know what they have taken from us," she said, her voice strong despite her small frame. "Our cities and our families and our future. They believed that would make us surrender forever." She pulled out the child's drawing, now worn so thin that light shone through the paper. She held it up for all to see, this simple image of stick figures holding hands beneath a yellow sun. "I found this in the rubble of Sao Paulo, drawn by a child who believed in tomorrow. That child is either dead or locked in a camp right now, being told that humanity deserves to be slaves." She let the words hang in the air, watching the anger build in the eyes of her people. "The Velthari think they know what rubble is," Lena continued. "They think it is the end of something, the final state of a broken civilization, but they do not understand humans." She folded the drawing and placed it back in her pocket, over her heart. "We are the children of builders and dreamers, of people who looked at wilderness and saw cities, who looked at the sky and saw pathways to the stars. We do not surrender to rubble, we build with it." The people in the tunnel began to nod, and their hands formed fists at their sides. "They took everything from us," Lena said, "but they forgot that humans have rebuilt before. We have survived ice ages and plagues and wars that killed millions, and we have always risen from the ashes." She looked at each face, making sure they understood what she was asking. "Now I am asking you to help me prove that humanity is not broken. I am asking you to help me build an army from the rubble they left behind." The answer came in 50 voices speaking as one. "We will build." And in that dark tunnel beneath the ruins of the old world, the Ember Network became something more. It became the foundation of humanity's revenge. They meant to break them. Humans built an army from the rubble. The resistance grew in secret places where the Velthari never thought to look, in the dead zones and the ruins and the deep forgotten corners of the wounded Earth. Lena established training camps in locations the aliens had written off as useless. The irradiated shell of what had been Chicago, the flooded tunnels beneath drowned Amsterdam, the frozen caves of Antarctica where even Velthari sensors could not reach. Recruits arrived broken and starving, their spirits crushed by years of slavery and loss. They came with empty eyes and trembling hands, barely able to remember what freedom had felt like. But they left as soldiers. The training was brutal because it had to be, because the enemy they faced was ancient and powerful and utterly without mercy. Lena pushed her people until they collapsed, then helped them stand and push them again. "Pain is just information," she told them while they struggled through obstacle courses built from rubble. "And information can be ignored. The Velthari think they understand suffering, but they have never felt what we feel. They have never lost everything and chosen to keep fighting anyway." The volunteers trained with weapons scavenged from ruins and rebuilt with human ingenuity. Guns that fired ammunition made from melted alien metal. Explosives cooked up by chemists who remembered their university lessons. Corvith worked alongside the human engineers, showing them how Velthari technology functioned and where its weaknesses hid. Together they created hybrid systems that combined alien power with human creativity. "Your species thinks differently than any we have conquered," Corvith admitted while helping to build a jamming device from stolen parts. "The Dominion solves problems with established patterns that have worked for millennia, but humans see a problem and invent entirely new solutions." He shook his head with something like wonder. "Our commanders call this chaos. I am beginning to think it might be your greatest weapon." The resistance developed tactics that no Velthari strategist could predict, strategies that changed from moment to moment, plans that relied on improvisation and instinct rather than rigid procedure. They learned to fight in ways the Dominion had never seen, using the broken landscape as an ally rather than an obstacle. Collapsed buildings became ambush sites, flooded streets became escape routes, and the rubble that the aliens had created became the terrain on which they would be defeated. But weapons and tactics were only part of what made the rubble army strong. The true power came from something the Velthari could never understand. Every soldier knew exactly why they were fighting. They carried photographs of lost children and memories of murdered families. They fought not for glory or conquest, but for the desperate hope of rebuilding what had been stolen. This made them unstoppable. A Velthari soldier fought because he was ordered to fight, because the Dominion expected obedience and punished failure. But a human soldier fought because every enemy killed was one step closer to freeing their children, one step closer to building a new home from the ashes of the old. The difference showed in every battle. Lena planned the assault on Integration Camp 17 for months, studying patrol patterns and security systems, coordinating with cells across 3 continents to create diversions that would draw Velthari forces away from the target. The camp sat in what had been southern France, a massive facility surrounded by energy fences where 3,000 human children were being transformed into servants. It was heavily guarded and supposedly impossible to attack. But humans had a different definition of impossible. The strike force moved at midnight. 200 soldiers in stolen Velthari armor crossing the dead farmland like ghosts. They carried weapons that should not have existed, built from scrap and genius, and they carried something more powerful than any gun. They carried fury. The guards died before they could raise the alarm, killed by humans who had learned to move in perfect silence. The fences fell to carefully placed charges that made no more sound than a whisper. Lena led the charge through the front gate, her weapon blazing as she cut down every alien who stood between her and the children. She had trained for this moment through years of hardship, and nothing could stop her now. The camp descended into chaos as prisoners realized what was happening, as guards rushed to respond to an attack coming from everywhere at once. The humans fought with savage precision, using every trick they had learned in the ruins. They lost soldiers, good people who died screaming defiance at the aliens who killed them. But they kept pushing forward because the mission was more important than any single life. When Lena burst through the doors of the main dormitory, she found 300 children staring at her with wide, frightened eyes. They had been told that the resistance was a lie, that no one would ever come for them. But someone had come. "We are here to take you home," Lena said, her voice cracking with emotion. "We are here to set you free." A teenage girl stepped forward, her eyes burning with a light that the Velthari had failed to extinguish. She was one of the ones who had kept hope alive, who had taught forbidden songs to the younger children. "We knew you would come," the girl said. "We never stopped believing." The evacuation was desperate and dangerous, with Velthari reinforcements closing in from every direction. But the children who had grown up in captivity proved to be the fiercest fighters of all. They knew the camp's layout better than any soldier. They knew where to hide and where to run, and they had spent years dreaming of exactly this moment. The teenagers grabbed weapons from fallen guards and fought alongside the adults, their fury even greater than Lena's, because they had spent their childhood being told they were less than human. 17 camps fell in the following weeks, each strike bigger and bolder than the last. The Velthari High Commander stared at the reports with growing disbelief. For the first time in the Dominion's history, a conquered species was fighting back after being broken, not just surviving, but actually attacking. "This should not be possible," he said to his advisors. "We followed every protocol. We crushed their civilization and separated their families and erased their culture. They should be docile workers by now." But his advisors had no answer, because the Dominion had never faced anything like humanity. Across the world, in hidden camps and secret tunnels, the rebel army grew stronger with each passing day. Former prisoners became soldiers, freed children became recruiters, and the fire that Lena had carried from Sao Paulo spread until it burned on every continent. The Velthari had meant to break humanity forever. Instead, they had created an enemy that would never stop fighting, an army forged in suffering and tempered by rage, a force that grew more powerful with every loss because humans transformed their pain into fuel. And the rubble kept rising. They meant to break them. Humans built an army from the rubble. The war erupted across Earth like wildfire in the 9th year of occupation, and the Velthari finally learned what they had awoken. Lena called it Operation Prometheus, after the ancient god who stole fire from heaven to give to humanity. The name was perfect because this was exactly what she intended to do, steal back the fire that the Dominion had tried to extinguish. The attacks came simultaneously on 6 continents, hitting power stations and communication hubs and weapons depots at the same moment. The Velthari commanders watched their tactical displays fill with red alert symbols as their occupation crumbled. "How is this possible?" the regional commander in Europe demanded. "Our intelligence showed no coordination among the human cells." But human cells had been talking to each other for years through methods the aliens never imagined, through songs and coded graffiti and messages tapped in Morse code through prison walls. The rebel army emerged from hiding with weapons that should not have existed, with tactics that made no sense to Velthari strategists, with soldiers who fought like demons and died with smiles on their faces. They called themselves the Reclamation now, and they were taking back their world. The Battle of the Scars became legend among the fighters, a desperate clash in the ruins of what had been New York City. The Velthari sent 5,000 soldiers to crush the human forces there, confident that superior numbers and firepower would guarantee victory. But the humans knew the rubble better than any alien ever could. They fought from collapsed skyscrapers and flooded subway tunnels, appearing from nowhere to strike and vanishing before the enemy could respond. The Velthari formation tried to advance in their usual patterns and found themselves trapped in canyons of broken concrete. Lena commanded from a bunker deep beneath the old financial district, watching reports flow in from scouts positioned throughout the ruins. She moved her forces like chess pieces, always one step ahead of the enemy. "Pull back the eastern unit and let them advance," she ordered. "Then collapse the bridge behind them. I want those soldiers trapped between the river and our kill zones." Her officers nodded and relayed the commands, and the trap closed on 2,000 Velthari soldiers who had walked into it without ever seeing the danger. The battle lasted 3 days, and when it ended, the aliens retreated in chaos. They had lost nearly half their force, and the humans had lost only 200. But New York was just one front in a war that spanned the world. On the moon, human workers who had spent years mining resources for the Dominion rose up against their overseers in what the Resistance called the Lunar Mutiny. They overwhelmed the guards with tools and stolen weapons, then seized control of the mass drivers. These massive machines had been built to launch or toward Velthari collection ships, but human engineers quickly realized they could serve a different purpose. Within hours, the mass drivers were raining destruction on Velthari orbital stations. The Dominion commanders watched their supply lines shatter as station after station exploded under the bombardment. They had never imagined that their own mining equipment could be turned against them. And then the Ghost Fleet appeared. Ships that had supposedly been destroyed in the original invasion emerged from the asteroid belt, their hulls patched with salvaged metal and their weapons rebuilt by engineers who had refused to give up. They had hidden for 9 years, waiting for exactly this moment. Captain Marcus Chen commanded from the bridge of the rebuilt cruiser Dawn's Revenge, leading 40 vessels against Velthari patrols that outnumbered them 3-1. But the human ships were crewed by survivors who had learned patience and fury in equal measure. "They expect us to fight like a conventional fleet," Marcus told his officers, "so we will not. Break formation and attack individually. Make them chase shadows while we tear them apart piece by piece." The Ghost Fleet scattered and struck from every direction, refusing to engage in the organized battles that Velthari tactics were designed to win. Human ships disappeared into asteroid fields and emerged behind enemy formations, launched missiles and vanished before return fire could find them. The Dominion lost 30 ships in the first week of fighting. The High Commander watched the disaster unfold from his flagship in high orbit, his gray face twisted with rage and disbelief. No conquered species had ever fought back like this, had ever caused such damage to the mighty Velthari war machine. "Bring more ships from the core worlds," he ordered, "and authorize the use of our remaining gravitational weapons. We will make an example that these humans will never forget." His advisors hesitated. "High Commander, our Virium-7 reserves are nearly exhausted. We have perhaps enough for 3 major strikes before the weapons become useless." "Then use them wisely," the High Commander snarled. "Choose a target that will break their spirit forever." He chose Geneva, a city where human refugees had gathered by the hundreds of thousands, a symbol of the old world's cooperation that the resistance used as a rallying cry. Rumor claimed that the rebellion's leadership was hiding there. The rumor was wrong. Lena had spread it deliberately to draw attention away from her real command center. But 10,000 civilians died when the gravitational weapon crushed the city into a crater. The Velthari broadcast the destruction across every remaining communication channel, expecting terror and surrender. They had made examples before on other conquered worlds, and the result was always the same. But humans were not like other species. Recruitment into the reclamation doubled within a week of the Geneva massacre. Survivors who had hidden in fear emerged to join the fight, and the soldiers who had already been fighting found their fury multiplied by grief. "They think killing civilians will make us surrender," a young soldier said while loading ammunition for the next battle. "But my parents died in Geneva. Now I will not stop fighting until every Velthari is dead or gone." Lena stood on the bridge of her captured cruiser Defiance Reborn, looking out at the fleet she had assembled through years of impossible effort. It was a ragged collection of stolen ships and rebuilt wrecks, held together by stubbornness and hope. The Velthari armada waited in high orbit, still larger and more powerful than anything the humans could match. But Lena knew something that the enemy did not understand. "They have numbers," her second-in-command warned, studying the tactical display with worried eyes. Lena smiled, and there was something fierce and terrible in that expression. "We have something they have never faced before," she replied. "Humans with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Today we take back our sky." The final battle for Earth was about to begin. They meant to break them. Humans built an army from the rubble. The battle for Earth's orbit began with fire and fury, as 200 human ships charged into the heart of the Velthari armada. Lena watched from the Bridge of Defiance Reborn as her fleet scattered across the void like angry wasps attacking a giant. The alien ships outnumbered them nearly 3-1, but the humans had learned that numbers meant nothing against soldiers who had already accepted death. "All ships execute pattern chaos," she ordered, using the name her tacticians had given to their most unpredictable strategy. "Make them guess where we will strike next." The human vessels broke formation in every direction, refusing to stay in predictable groups. Velthari targeting systems struggled to track enemies that moved with no apparent logic, no pattern their ancient computers could recognize. Captain Chen led the Ghost Fleet in a devastating run against the enemy's left flank, his ships appearing from behind an asteroid they had towed into position months earlier. They launched everything they had and vanished before the return fire could find them. 3 Velthari cruisers exploded in chains of brilliant light. But the enemy was not helpless. Velthari weapons were powerful and precise, and human ships began to die as the battle spread across thousands of kilometers. Lena felt each loss like a knife in her heart, but she did not let herself mourn. Not yet. There would be time for grief after victory, or there would be no time for anything ever again. "The enemy flagship is holding back," Corvith observed from his station at the tactical display. "The High Commander wants to watch the battle before committing his best ships." "Then we need to make him commit," Lena replied, her mind racing through possibilities. What would scare a Velthari commander enough to make him abandon caution? Corvith's black eyes widened with sudden understanding. "Losing control," he said. "The Dominion values order above all else. If we can create enough chaos, if we can make the battle seem uncontrollable, he will panic and throw everything he has into restoring order." Lena smiled grimly and opened a channel to her entire fleet. "All ships prepare for maximum chaos operations. I want every trick we have deployed at once. Missile swarms, electronic warfare, suicide drones, everything. Make them think they are fighting 10 fleets instead of 1. The space around Earth erupted into madness as human ships launched every weapon and decoy they possessed. Velthari sensors screamed with conflicting data, their ancient systems overwhelmed by an enemy that refused to fight in any recognizable way. The High Commander watched his tactical display fill with chaos and felt something he had never experienced in 300 years of conquest: fear. "All ships advance," he ordered, his voice cracking with desperation. "Restore order at any cost." His flagship surged forward with its escort of elite warships, exactly as Lena had planned. "There," she said, pointing at the display, "that is our target. If we kill the High Commander, their entire command structure collapses. Corvith said they cannot adapt without central authority." "The flagship is the most heavily defended ship in their fleet," her second-in-command warned. "Then we need a distraction," Lena replied, and she opened a channel to a ship called Final Sacrifice. The crew of Final Sacrifice had volunteered for this mission, knowing they would not survive. They were the oldest veterans, the ones with no family left to lose, and they had chosen to give their lives for the chance at victory. "We are ready, Commander," the captain's voice came through steady and calm. "Make it count," Lena whispered, "and thank you." Final Sacrifice accelerated toward the Velthari flagship at maximum speed, her weapons blazing to draw attention. The enemy ships turned to intercept, concentrating their fire on this single maddened vessel. The crew transmitted targeting data with their dying breaths, painting the flagship's weak points for the human fleet. When Final Sacrifice finally exploded, every ship in the reclamation knew exactly where to shoot. Lena led the assault herself, taking Defiance Reborn straight into the heart of the enemy formation, while her allies provided covering fire. Explosions bloomed around her ship as Velthari weapons found their mark, but she did not slow down. The flagship loomed ahead, a massive vessel covered in the scars of 1,000 conquests. Somewhere inside, the High Commander believed he was still going to win. He was wrong. Human hackers had been working on Velthari systems for years, teenagers who had grown up in integration camps learning to code on stolen tablets. Now, they uploaded their masterpiece, Virus, into the Dominion's communication network. For 11 minutes, the Velthari fleet went deaf and blind. Their ships could not receive orders or coordinate defenses. Their sensors showed only static. And in that chaos, human vessels closed to point-blank range and fired everything they had. The flagship's shields fell in 6 minutes. Lena needed only 4 more to breach the hull. She led the boarding party herself, fighting through corridors filled with desperate Velthari soldiers. The aliens were taller and stronger, but humans had something they would never understand: absolute determination. They reached the throne room with only a handful of survivors, stepping over the bodies of friends who had given their lives to get them this far. Lena's weapon was nearly empty, and blood from a wound on her head ran down her face. The High Commander waited for her, surrounded by his elite guard. "You should not be here," he said, his voice filled with contempt. "You should be broken and obedient like every other species we have conquered." Lena raised her weapon and smiled. "We are not like other species." The final fight was brutal and desperate, with humans falling one by one against guards trained for 1,000 years of war. But Lena had not come this far to fail, and she cut through the enemy with fury that shocked even the Velthari. When she finally stood over the dying High Commander, she was the last human left alive in that room. "You were supposed to be broken," he hissed, his gray blood spreading across the floor. Lena reached into her pocket and pulled out the child's drawing, now stained with blood and worn thin by years of carrying. She held it up so the dying alien could see. "You broke our world," she said, her voice heavy with exhaustion and triumph. "You scattered our people and took our children, but you forgot something every human child knows." She knelt beside him so he could hear her final words. You cannot build a sandcastle without first crushing the sand. The High Commander died with confusion in his eyes, never understanding what had happened. Outside, the Velthari armada surrendered as word spread that their leader was dead. Ships that had conquered 1,000 worlds lowered their weapons because they did not know what else to do without orders from above. Humanity had won. The news spread across the Dominion like wildfire, reaching conquered species on 100 different worlds. For the first time in 10,000 years, the empire that had seemed invincible had been defeated. Rebellions ignited everywhere as slaves realized that their masters could be beaten. The Dominion began to crack, its foundation of fear crumbling now that fear no longer worked. 1 year later, Lena visited a school in rebuilt Sao Paulo, walking through halls filled with children's laughter. The scars of war still marked the city, but new buildings rose from the rubble taller than before. A young girl approached her shyly, holding a piece of paper. "I made this for you," the girl said, offering the drawing. Lena took it and felt tears running down her face. It showed stick figures holding hands beneath a yellow sun, standing beside a spaceship that reached toward the stars. "What is this?" she asked, her voice thick with emotion. The girl smiled with all the hope of humanity's future. "It is us," she said, "going to help the others." Lena looked at the drawing and thought about everything that had happened. The invasion and the occupation, the suffering and the sacrifice, the desperate battles and the friends who had died so that children could draw pictures in peace. The Velthari had meant to break humanity. They had crushed human cities into rubble and scattered human families across the world. They had stolen human children and tried to erase human history. They had done everything that had worked on 200 species before. But they had not understood what humans were made of. Humans were not broken by rubble. Humans were made of it. They took disaster and loss and turned it into fuel. They built from ashes and they rose from graves. The Dominion had created their own destruction the moment they attacked Earth, because every blow they struck only made humanity stronger. And now the children were dreaming of helping others, of spreading across the stars to free every species the Velthari had conquered. The rubble had become an army. The army had become a legend. And the legend would echo across the galaxy until every slave was free.